Well, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us once again. You haven't jumped off the ship yet. This is entertaining enough for, at least for you. I always like to speak to the listener, not everybody. And I haven't said it in a few weeks, but I appreciate you, my friend, as a listener while you're driving, while you're going for your morning run, your afternoon run, you're at the gym, however you're consuming this material that we call the Dan Time Podcast. Thanks for making time and for working it into your rotation. I'm your host, Dan McArdle, and been trying to get better on the pronunciation. My dad, as you know, called me out. He said, it's not McArdle. Get it right, son. It's McArdle. And maybe people can relate with their own surnames, getting a little lazy with the pronunciation. But uh, we've had a great run of guests. This show aims to bring you to all corners of the globe. We've had musicians from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, uh, Canada, and um, we've had business people. We've had some out of bounds guests from my network that have hopefully made this show entertaining. And tonight, I am just super excited to welcome a former Major League Baseball player that played for one of my, well, not one of my favorite teams. One of the teams he played for is my favorite team. Uh, Dan Winkler is my guest tonight. Dan, thanks so much for making time for this podcast, and thanks for being the next Dan on the show. How you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. This is a great concept. Us Dan's got to stick together.
I love it. Yeah, Dan Harrison. I always like to put a plug in for Dan Harrison. He's a singer-songwriter from Nashville. Great guy. And he said there are Dans doing great things out there. There's a lot of people doing great things, but sometimes Dans, I don't know, we feel like we maybe get left out sometimes, or maybe that's just a what do they call it, a complex.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dan Winkler, just to keep it on in silly season here for a minute, Dan, you really hit the trifecta. If I understand correctly, you answer to, or have in the past answered to, Daniel, Danny, and Dan. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. My wife calls me Danny, professionally, probably known as Dan. I don't get too many Daniels anymore, but maybe I should go back to the old Hebrew, Daniel. But yeah, I go by it all.
Yeah, I've had some older folks in the past that I'll introduce myself as Dan, and the handshake is complete, and they just insist on calling me uh, the biblical Daniel, which Dan is, and I've never gotten a clear answer, but Dan, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. I don't know if it's actually pronounced Dan or if it's I don't. There's only a couple other ways you could say it, but
Yeah, I've wondered the same thing. That is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. I've noticed that too, but Daniel in the lion's den seems a lot cooler than maybe it's not. I mean, having your own tribe is pretty cool. You're the leader.
right. Well, Dan, you grew up in Effington, Illinois, and I always like to take my guests back to the early days, um, their childhood, their in your case, sports career.
Hmm.
Definitely want to touch on and maybe you haven't been asked about it in a long time, the UCF days, because I had a guest early in this project, Vic Penn, former
Okay,
UCF Golden Knight quarterback,
nice.
right around 2000, 99, 2000 time period. Um, but yeah, take me back to those early days. And I understand you grew up a St. Louis Cardinals fan. Your grandmother was a Cub fan, so you got some
Yeah.
exposure to the WGN Harry Carey stuff. Um, how was it being a little kid and realizing that I kind of like this baseball thing?
Yeah, you did your homework. I'm impressed, honestly. So yeah, I grew up small town. Honestly, it's about 10,000 people. We grew up 90 miles from St. Louis, and about 300 from Chicago. But it's very split where I'm from. Cubs, Cardinals. Uh, I just grew up because we could go to the St. Louis games, like I watched Ozzie Smith and Ray Lankford and Steve Klein. Actually, Steve Klein was a coach of mine, which was pretty cool. But yeah, so Mark McGuire, those guys they were my heroes. But my grandma, huge Cub fan. Like she'd pick me up from school. She'd have AM radio. She'd have the Cubs game going, and she's like, "Come on, hurry up! We got to get out of town," because she lived out in the country, and she didn't get as good a service in town. So she's like, "Hurry up! We got to get out of town. I don't want to miss my Cubbies." So yeah, the diehard Cubby, it bleeds. My grandfather actually, he was also a huge Cub fan. They don't miss a Cubs game to this day. My grandma had to get Marquee specially so she could watch the Cub games. That's the only thing. The Game Show Network and the Cubs game. Marquee is the only two channels she wanted. But yeah, so I actually grew up being in Illinois. I grew up a big. I thought I was going to play in the NBA. I loved basketball. I loved everything about basketball. I thought I was going to go to University of Illinois, get drafted in the second round, because I'm humble, and play for the Bulls, like every Illinois kid. So yeah, but then I realized my senior year, I was getting recruited my junior year to play baseball, and then my senior year I averaged 4 points playing basketball. So I'm like, all right, maybe baseball. But I always had this like love for baseball, playing in the backyard. We played wiffle ball, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then I went to junior college, had some Division I offers, small Division Is. I just felt like I wasn't ready for that. I always tell kids nowadays, for me, it was kind of like that ladder, like that stepping ladder. And junior college was a great transition for me from a small like high school. We had 60 kids in my graduating class, so we're playing other small schools, and then it was good for me to just go to Parkland, my junior college. We had 4 other big leaguers from my junior college, so it wasn't like the talent wasn't there. And then I transferred to UCF, and I got drafted by the Cubs actually my sophomore year in the 43rd round. So they don't even have that round anymore. That's how late it was. So it was an obvious kind of thing for me to just, again, I wasn't ready. I felt like I needed to go another ladder, another step. And Division I going down to UCF was great for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you see sometimes for high school athletes, they'll draw interest, early as an underclassman from a major league team, and it's a late round pick. And is that a tough call when you realize and who lets you know that, hey man, the Cubs have drafted you, and you got to sit and think about it for a minute. What was that a tough decision, or were you pretty much set that?
Yeah, it was tough. I was in the Northwoods League, so I was in Minnesota, and I remember I was on the bus, and I got a call from the scout, Dan Zielinski, who passed away unfortunately recently. But Stan Zielinski, sorry, he called me and he was like, he's like, "Hey, we just took you. We just drafted you," and I was like, "What?" And he goes, "No, yeah, we just drafted you." And I didn't even know what to say. I was like, "Thanks," I'm like, "Awesome," I was really excited. So I called my parents. We had some phone calls, and then that realization was like, "Am I ready for this?" Like, am I ready to get on a bus and get paid to play baseball? Like, my dream is to play in the big leagues, but am I truly ready to take that next step and compete and show that I belong in the big leagues? And for me, when maybe I was pretty mature for being 20, but I was like, I don't think I'm ready, and so we had that back and forth, and you always have a number. It's the draft, so I had a number, and the Cubs were like, we're not going to meet that. And my college coach, he was really good about that too, just kind of talking me through things like, hey, I think there's some seasoning that you probably need to do. So I kind of leaned on a lot of people, as I did throughout my career, and honestly my new career, like just lean on other people. their experiences, some wisdom, and really what feels right. So that's kind of, it was a hard decision, but it was obviously the right one.
Yeah, I like how you say that, lean on other people. I had a quote here if I could find it, where I think even as a college athlete at Central Florida, you were you're saying, look, I try to learn from my coaches. I try to learn from people in general, um,
Mhm.
and just uh, draw from other people's experiences. And sometimes you agree with what they're saying. Sometimes you feel inclined to challenge what they're saying. But
Yeah,
that's probably a good advice for young athletes as well
yeah,
to get those get those second and third opinions. Dan, I realized that I think I mispronounced your hometown. I may have said Effington, Effingham.
yeah. It's a funny name. Let's just leave it at
Right.
that. Get it a lot. You're from effing where? That's what I hear a lot.
Yeah, right. I didn't want to go there, but I figured, if you wanted to mention it,
Yeah,
that'd be funny. But
yeah.
um,
It's great. It's a great town. It is.
so Dan, at playing for the Golden Knights, a special season there. Um, Probably a lot of personal growth and growth as an athlete, and
Mhm.
you probably made some friends with people that you still keep in contact with today. Um, I grew up in the Birmingham area, so I'm a UAB
Okay.
graduate, and I'm going to pull
Nice.
something just out of obscurity here for you. See if you remember this game, May 14th, 2011. This is at UAB, I believe, and uh, you guys are scoreless into the 10th inning,
Mhm.
and the bats explode for 9 runs, capped off by a grand slam, Eric Kempe, and I
Yep.
believe you and Nick Sissio combined for. Don't let me say this wrong. Was this a no hitter
No, I
or
don't
just
believe
a
so.
combined
It
shutout?
was, I think it was a combined shutout. I would have remembered a no hitter, but it was probably one of my better games, maybe my best game in college. Yeah, I had a roller coaster season at UCF for sure. But yeah, that was one of my better ones for sure. I definitely remember. So Eric Hempy was my roommate, and I definitely remember him hitting a grand slam because he's let everybody know he hit a grand slam. He's just one of those guys. So.
Now you did have an 11 strikeout game because at this time you're a starting pitcher
Hmm.
for the Golden Knights. So against, is it Houston?
Yep. Yep.
Um, I did a little bit of research here. I wouldn't say I did as cleanly as I would like, but I did
That's all
want to
right.
draw some attention to that period of your career and before you decide to sign with the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah.
So at this point, you're ready. You're ready for that call. Do you have an idea of which round you might be selected in at this point?
Yeah. So, going back to my UCF season, it was I was a Friday night guy, in, college baseball. That's like a big deal. I was our opening day starter. Um, and I had some ebbs and flows. I started out well, and then I just hit like this rough patch. And I gave up 8 runs in the second inning against Southern Miss. My worst, maybe one of my worst games of my career. And I remember walking off and being like, "I'm never getting drafted. I'm not playing professional baseball. I'm coming back my senior year." Because at this point, I've been talking to scouts and things like that. And my parents were at the game, and I remember just telling them afterwards, like, just plan on me coming back next year. And it was something in that, like, the piece of being like down in the dumps and it just kind of brought me back. And I got moved to the bullpen, and then I came out of the bullpen, pitched 5 innings the next 2 weeks, and scoreless, and it was kind of like that, like redemption. And I came back, and that's when I pitched against Houston. I pitched against UAB. I think I pitched against UAB twice. I pitched against Florida State. Memphis was another good games that I had, and I just kind of like built this momentum. And I was getting the scouts were telling me, like, we really like you. We see you in like the third to fifth round, no later than the seventh or eighth. And I was like, great, like that's where I felt like, obviously maybe a little conceited of me, but I felt like that's where I should go. And I remember draft day sitting, so we were cleaning up my apartment, and my girlfriend, who's my wife at the time, she was coming down because her grandma had just passed away. So I was going to fly home for the funeral. But I remember like with my laptop up and just listening to all the picks and getting the third and the fourth and the fifth. It's like, all right, like maybe the eighth and then the sixth and the seventh. Here's some familiar names, like, oh, like guys I played against. I thought, I'd be around them, and then the eighth and the ninth and the 10th. And then it just kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. And I was like, uh, you know, all right, like I just shut my computer off. I'm like, I'm done. Like, we'll see what happens. And then the Rockies called me in like the 18th round, and I hadn't even talked to the Rockies. I think I had like one or two conversations with John Cederberg, who's their scout at the time. And he calls me. He's like, "Hey, we want to take you." I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "What's your number?" And I was like, "Just draft me." And so, like 10 minutes later, he's like, "Hey, we just drafted you." And I was like, "Great." Like I'm ready to go. At that point, like I felt like I had went through it. I felt like I was so mature. I felt like I was ready to go. And then I was like, I'm signing. And honestly, there was like very little negotiation. We negotiate. They're like, "Here, we're offering you this." I'm like, they're like, "There's not much." It was $25,000. I mean, it was like nothing, And actually, I spent most of it on a ring for my wife, so that's all I needed the money for. But yeah, so it was the best thing that happened to me, um, because going into pro ball, I was like, I'm making the big leagues. Like I'm going to prove to everybody that I belong to be in the big leagues. And I had this like
Love it.
chip on my shoulder, that it was like, and I remember this probably getting into a little bit, but I remember my first full season, or my first season, went to Casper, Wyoming, pitched well, and then I went to instructional leagues, and it was kind of like instructional league was a big deal. It was like where all the prospects went, and I remember the like seventh and eighth and ninth rounders were all there, and I was like, they were all talking about how they're going to spend their signing bonus, and that just rubbed me even so much wrong. Like I was like, I'm spending my money on a ring for my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, I'm going to make it. Like I distinctly remember being on the bus and them talking about their signing bonus, and I'm just like, I'm going to be better than them. And that's probably, like I said, not a great thing, but that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, some fans may assume that a guy gets drafted and gets that signing bonus, or they maybe assume that a lot of players get a large signing bonus, and the first thing they're thinking about is where they can spend it, and
Yeah.
and maybe not imagining a guy like Dan Winkler, who your central focus was making the big leagues,
Yeah.
and not so much of what's the continental breakfast going to look like, what have uh, are we staying at a 2 or 3 star hotel? I'm sure it was um,
Yeah.
whatever it was, or how long's the bus ride. I think I listened to a podcast that you appeared on several years ago, and you talked about just the contrast from UCF and usually having to, I guess, charter a plane to away games to you're in Central Florida, and now you're in Casper, Wyoming, taking these
Yeah.
half-day bus trips.
Yeah.
What's it like on you're taking those bus rides, and do you, even if you like the guy that you're sitting next to, and I mean, do you nod off a lot? Are you listening to the music you like, or how do you pass the time?
Yeah. Cards. Yeah. Luckily, we had iPads and everything like that. If it was, 10 years before that and all you had was a Walkman, I guess, it
Yeah, I've
would
heard
have been a little.
stories about there was a guy Dan Zlotnick who's a recording artist up in Westchester County, New York, and he
Yeah.
played at Marist and University of Tampa for a season,
Yeah.
and some independent league ball. And I guess in independent league on the bus rides, there'd be some guys would break out into song and start singing, and that's something else I do want to talk to you about. I understand you play guitar, just to
I,
kind of pique everybody's interest here, and maybe we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
yeah.
But yes, so you made the most of where you were. Um, it's got to be difficult, I guess, and your wife sticking with you through all these changes, not knowing what's going to happen next. Are you going to get traded? Are you
Mhm.
going up or down in the system? That takes a special person, and a special
Yeah,
bond between you.
it really does. We've been together since we were 17, and she's the best. She actually, I joke that she was my sugar mama in the minor leagues because I made $6,000 my first full season before taxes. And it was like I wouldn't have, I emotionally, mentally, and then physically, I wouldn't have made it without her. So like everyone talks about, you see like the glamour and of all the guys on the big league fields, but there's a family behind them. There's people that stand by them through all the stuff that they go through to get where they're at, and then to stay where they're at. It is a lot, even in the big leagues. Like the stress level, the travel, and a lot of people have kids. You're older when you get to the big leagues, and it is just a lot logistically. So yeah, I will brag on her all day long because she deserves it. And now she's a nurse practitioner. She actually went to during COVID. She went to back to school, and so she got a master's during COVID. And we had two kids, small kids. So she's amazing.
Wow, that's just awesome to hear. Um, and for you guys, I know that your family is very important to you. Being a dad is probably the most exciting thing to happen to you. I can relate there. Everyone that's had children, I hope all men feel this way, but there's just nothing better than being a dad. It's a great
Best job in the world.
responsibility. Yeah, it's just, um, and you run into people sometimes who you think, well, they look like they've got everything that they need. Um,
Mm.
maybe why aren't they very happy? And some other things may be missing in their life as well. But sometimes, the bond that you have with your kids, that you cannot put a price on it, and
Yep.
um, and that's built
Yep.
over time. But
Yeah.
but
That's
but
my wife and I were just talking about that the other day. Just a little story was the best part about the big leagues was getting to share it with my son, my kids. I got a picture right over here. I'll show it to you real quick. I'm
yeah,
sure you'll appreciate it. This is my son and I in
oh man,
at Wrigley Field in the clubhouse, and he's walking down out of the park with me. Like I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now like I look back and I'm 3 years removed from that time, and like that was the best part about it, getting to share that with my family for sure.
yeah, and he'll have that photograph to treasure, you know, for his whole life, and um, uh, wow, just an amazing uh, just an amazing dad story, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. He doesn't think it's cool. He's like, why isn't my baseball games on TV? He's like, can people watch me on? He's like, he wasn't that cool. So yeah, it's funny now.
So Dan, so some things happen, and some casual fans are maybe not aware of all the procedures in baseball. There's a lot of transactions that take place, where you might read it or hear about it. You're like, I don't know what designated for assignment means. I don't know what Rule 5 draft means. So you were Rule 5, I guess, is the colloquial way to express it. And
Yep.
the Braves select you in the Rule 5 draft. What exactly, for people who've never heard that, is a Rule 5 draft?
Yeah. So it's a good thing for the players. So instead of being in the minor leagues forever, after a certain period, It's 4 years for if you're drafted out of college. If you're not on the 40-man roster, which is the big league roster, which is they can take you from that roster. If you're not on the 40-man roster, you go in a pool and there's a draft called the Rule 5 draft, and teams can select you from that pool and put you on their 40-man roster. And at the time, I had just had Tommy John surgery, which made sense for the Rockies not to keep me. But the Braves said, we don't care. We'll put you on our 40-man roster, which was the biggest blessing ever. So, yeah, that's kind of the procedural thing about it of the Rule 5. It's a great thing for guys like me so you're not stuck in the minor leagues making $6,000 your entire career. Like the Yankees, the Dodgers, they stockpile kind of that talent, which is their right. But after a certain 4 years, if they don't have room on their 40-man and they can't put them on, or they didn't think anybody would come through, other teams can take them off of in the Rule 5 draft. So, yeah, it's a great thing for baseball.
Wow. And just a few months before, like you said, you tore your UCL.
Yep.
How are you feeling at that point? Was that your first major sports injury that sidelined you?
Yeah, that
for an
was
extended period of time.
Yeah, like I rolled my ankle, sprained my ankle in basketball, but that was the first major injury. And I remember I actually had a no-hitter going in the fourth inning against the Springfield Cardinals. I remember just feeling like just funny feeling. And then I threw about 3 or 4 more pitches after that, and then it just felt like a rubber band snapped. And I was like, I knew what it was immediately. Trainer came out and he's like, what happened? I was like, I think I just tore my UCL. And he's like, all right, we're going to take you out. They did tests and like, yeah, it seems like it's broken or it's torn. Got MRI, stuff like that, and it got confirmed. But honestly, I don't know why I felt like this peace. Like I had no control over it. I felt like
Dan, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to
sorry.
signal, just keep going.
Oh, my bad.
Folks, I am if you're watching on the video version, so obviously it's no secret. I record these from my house, which I think a lot of podcasters do. Um, but I forgot that we got this alarm clock for my son. So I'm in his room, and it goes off. It's supposed to go off at 7 a.m. It goes off at 7 p.m. and I haven't adjusted it yet. So that's what I had to go silence.
It's all good. It's all right.
But
I thought you were having a malfunction or something,
yeah.
and sorry.
Anyway, I'm sure what point you got cut off there.
Yeah, I was just talking about how after I just had like this piece about it, and I don't know if it's just because I was pitching well, and I felt like I had done everything in my control and couldn't really, it was in God's hand at that point, and I so they make the decision. This was in June. I tore my UCL. July I had surgery. I did my rehab. Didn't really think much of it. November came around. That's when they have to make the decision if to put you on the 40-man or not. Got the phone call from the assistant farm director who I was close with. He said, "Hey, Wink, we're not going to put you on the 40-man." I was like, "That's fine." He goes, "Really?" It's like, "Yeah, I understand." He goes, "Well, like hopefully, you do have the Rule 5. Like, we'll see what happens with that." He's like, "Hopefully for you that you get taken. Hopefully for us you don't." Great conversation. And then I was working out the Rule 5 draft, and I was like, I'm not going to get taken. Like, I'm not even going to set myself up for it. I was just starting to work out. I got a phone call, and it was from my agent. It's like, "Hey, Braves just selected you." I was like, "What?" And at that point, I was like, I was working out of my junior college, and I was like, I'm not even going to rack the weights. Like, I got to go home. And I was telling the coach, and he's like, "Yeah, get out of here! Congrats! Like whatever. Like we'll celebrate." So I drove home, told Camille, I was like, "I just got the Braves took me," and she's like, "What?" And she started crying, and it was like it was a cool moment. Yeah,
I love it. That is just um it's really heartwarming. It's really exciting, and I can just imagine, uh, your drive back home, and you just can't wait uh, to just share the joy with Camille. Um,
yeah,
so later, you're a late September call up. Is that right? In 2015,
yep, yep. So I
I,
was, yeah, the Braves
I
put me on the 60-day. So yeah, it was a late September call up.
I jotted down that you correct me if I'm wrong here because this is just some chicken scratch. But the first batter you faced, Michael Conforto,
That's
you struck him
correct.
out.
Yep, fastball
Incredible.
high. Yeah.
Uh, You don't forget that, do you?
I will never forget that. I will never. Nope. The best advice some of the best advice I've had a lot of good advice. Peter Moylan, before I ran out, he's like, take this all in. You only get one of these. And as it was in City Field, as I was running out, I was just looking around, and that was 2015. So the Mets went to the World Series that year, and I just like, man, it was. I can remember everything, almost everything about it. I can remember the dirt. I can remember getting on the mound, digging in for the first time. Actually, my first pitch, AJ Przinsky was catching me, and he completely whiffed, and it broke the shin guard of the umpire. So we had about a five
Oh
to 10 minute
man.
delay. Yeah, and Drelton Simmons comes over and he's like, "What'd you do that for?" And I was like, "This stuff only happens to me, like us Dans."
Right. Now, are you a ball of nerves when you're out there on the mound, or you getting loose in the pen and you kind of know, all right, I'm about to go in. This is going to be my first appearance, or are you kind of centering yourself and what kind of zone do you get in that situation?
Yeah, I was so excited. Obviously nervous, but I was excited. Like I was confident in my abilities. I was excited to have a chance to prove what I can do and that I belong in the big leagues. Like this was my time. Like this is going to be, I'm from now on, I'm a big leaguer. Like I can say that forever in my life. Like from this, and I was just excited. And that kind of like kept going through my head. And I was like, what happens in this game is going to be on my baseball reference page forever, and it's going to be good. It's kind of like
I
that
love it. I
excitement.
love it.
So, yeah.
Dan, I'm also looking at so I have to assume that people who listen to this podcast, not everybody's a baseball fan, but I want to make sure this is an interesting conversation. Way back on the trailer, please don't listen to it. I'm not. It's the very first thing I ever recorded, but I did say that I made a promise that you're going to learn something, you're going to laugh. Hopefully, we keep delivering on that end. But your pitch arsenal at this point, uh, you're relying on the four seam fastball, a changeup, slider sometimes, I guess, in that first year. You
Mhm.
haven't introduced the cut fastball until a couple years later. Is that right?
Yeah. I threw it a little bit, but it wasn't as good. Again, we'll probably get into this, but I changed my mechanics a lot after
Mm-hmm.
my second injury. Yeah, so really, I had a much lower release, and my four seam fastball, as they would call it now, it's the vertical attack angle. Mine was super low, so I was really low. So the ball kind of didn't drop as much as hitters expected. So I relied on that four seam fastball up in the zone a lot, especially when I later in my career, I definitely, but early in my career, especially even when I was a starter, I tried sinker slider being that guy because it was Colorado. Everyone at the time, they're like, hey, sinkers only work here. But I would go sinker slider and I'd get the full count and I'd throw a four seam right down the middle and they'd swing a miss. And it was like almost every time. So yeah, I threw a lot of four seam and sliders when I initially came in.
Now, Dan, I know you're a good guy and everything, but on the mound, when you're when you're going up against the other team's best, and like you said, it's a 3-2 count. Are there situations in baseball, this has to go on all the time, where the batter knows that that four seamer's coming, you know you're throwing it, and it's just just kind of like, let's see if you can catch up to this.
No
Um,
better feeling. They're like that. That's the man
they don't
versus
have to
man.
guess. Yeah, they know it's coming. Yeah,
Mhm. It's a no better feeling when they swing and miss, but it is a terrible feeling when they hit it like 450 yards, 50 feet yards. I'm in golf mode already. But yeah, when
yeah,
they smack that thing and you're like, oh, they got me. It's a bad feeling too.
yeah. I mean, sometimes you'll see a pitcher, he just knows it, and he doesn't make that full turnaround to watch it clear the fence. He's just doesn't even look, depending
That's
on
kind
the
of
game
a
situation.
yeah, you tip your cap, you're like, you got me. All right. Yeah. Gamesmanship.
A little oddball question, maybe a little bit here that I want to throw in there. It it's going to happen. Pitchers who've got good control of their pitches are going to hit guys sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, when it happened, do you just, I mean, do guys give you looks? Do they kind of know, all right, that was, he didn't mean to do that. He's trying to um, take that side of the plate. I know, I get it, but, or are there some tense moments where you hit guys?
There's definitely tense moments. There's one vivid one that's sticks out. It's 2018. We're playing the Nats. Uh, Harper was obviously on a tear, like always, and I think he had two homers in the game. Um, and I came in to face him. I think lead off. I don't remember all the details, but I remember I was throwing the cutter at the time and trying to throw a cutter inside, and I hit him on his back shin. And I was like on the mound. I was like, he's going to be pissed. Like he's going to be upset.
Yeah,
He's going to come at me. And I walked down like pretty close, like kind of ready. And I remember Flowers kind of walked out too because we were all kind of you can kind of feel that. And Bryce gets up and he's like looking around like oh, and then he looks at Flowers and he goes, "Is that a cutter?" And Flowers like, "Yeah." He goes, "That was a good one." And then he just ran to first. And I was like, "That's it," you know. And then there are times where you're like, nothing happened, and you think, and the batter's upset. There's especially when it gets up here. Guys obviously
yeah.
start getting upset. When it's up, uh, the higher it gets, batters get obviously they should. But yeah, it's it's not comfortable. You don't want to ever hit somebody on purpose, but you're also not you're trying to beat them. Like if
Yeah.
if I'm facing Ronald Acuna and I know that he can't hit a four seamer inside, I'm going to throw four seamers inside to him as much as I can because I'm trying to get him out. He's one of the best in the game. Like that's just an example. So yeah.
Wow, I love all that stuff. The inside the game or whatever you say. But so
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it's people who have followed your career, and we'll cover it here. I don't want to go into any more detail than you're comfortable with, but the elbow injury that you fracture your elbow, 2016 in April of 16. The season's just underway. Um,
Mhm.
and I know you described that as probably one of the darker times, I guess. Um, Now, going back, and we've probably gotten a little deep in the episode here, I did want to mention your faith and how that has sustained you through situations that other people may not have something to grab a hold of, and an upsetting situation, a setback. Um, it could be anything, a financial
Mhm.
difficulty. They're not equipped and they kind of fall apart. But this was a really tough time for you. Um, Take me through that. Did you think? I know I remember hearing you say you're going to the clubhouse, and why is this happening again? Or there's something else you're saying about the injury. Just couldn't believe it was going on again. And
Yeah,
how you
yeah,
got through it.
yeah. So leading up to that, spring training 2016, like I got to make the team. I'm a Rule 5. Like there's some the logistics that go into that. Like I have to be on the roster. I got to make the team. And about halfway through spring training, my elbow really starts hurting. And it was like every time like I threw a baseball. And, trainers, we had an image, it was fine. But there's just arthritis from the Tommy John, like it's residual from Tommy John. So I was like, I'm fine, I'm just throwing through it. And it was every single time. But I gotta make this team. Like I can't go on the DL. Like I'm telling them, don't put me on the DL, don't put me on the DL. Um, and I finally make the team, and it was the best. And I pitch an opening day, and I strike out the side, and man, it was the last opening day at Turner Field. So like I'm so glad that I didn't. And then we're playing the Cardinals, and I get out of a bases loaded jam on Sunday. Like we're supposed to go to DC. Like I show up in my suit. My stuff's already in DC. Like um, and then I come out for the next inning. I get the first two guys out, and then I throw a slider in the dirt, and I'm like, oh man, that didn't like that was a different pain than I had been feeling. And then next pitch, I threw a cutter, and it just felt like it just ripped. Like I felt like I broke my elbow up here, and like it just felt like my whole arm kind of just broke. And I remember like walking off, and I don't remember so much pain. Like you said, I remember not again, please God, not again, and not another elbow surgery. I'm finally here. I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. Like I finally made it. I'm pitching well. Like I'm pitching in the seventh and eighth inning. Like I'm supposed to be here. And that all hit me. And if you watch it on YouTube, I just like collapsed. And like that was the realization. It wasn't really so much the pain. I was just like adrenaline. Um, it was like when all that realization just hit. And I didn't know the severity of the injury, but yeah, like I was just praying, praying, and praying. And we thankfully Dr. Andrews did my surgery like 2 days later and put a screw in there. He's like, "You're going to pitch again." So he kind of put that confidence in the back of my mind. My wife says she watched the surgery. He's like puts it in, and then he's like, oh, he X-rays it. And he's like, it's not perfect, so he'll like go back and forth. And he said he did that like 3 or 4 times, and he was just super meticulous with it. And so like I can't put into words how thankful I am for that man. For real. So yeah, like back in Florida, rehabbing again. I'd spent all 2015 there. And actually, 2016, I didn't watch any baseball till the World Series. I watched the Cubbies. I watched watched Game 6 and Game 7. Those are the only two baseball games I watched, and I'm so glad that I watched Game 7 because the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, no. And I'm glad you watched too. Um,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
going back to your surgery there, I pulled up another article on that time period, and you know, I'm from the Pensacola area, so I
Mm,
was reading this is Atlanta News Journal the night before you're sitting in a hotel in Pensacola before the surgery, just you know, not really sure how to process everything, probably a little nervous, pretty emotional, wondering if you're going to pitch again before it goes as well as it possibly could have.
yeah, yeah. I vaguely remember. I distinctly, not vaguely, distinctly remember that because, and I talked about like going back to Florida, and it was just so many ups and downs. And I remember a certain time, like I'd go back and get an X-ray, and it wasn't fully healed. I had like a stress fracture, a compound fractures, and it just wasn't healing correctly. And it just I was praying, I was doing all this stuff. Like I was getting red light therapy. I was going and doing dry needling and all the stuff, acupuncture. Like I was doing everything I could to try to get this thing to heal. And thankfully, there's a great drug that we tried. It's called Forteo that helped it actually speed up the healing. But I remember my last, like third, like probably like the third to last X-ray I got before I was cleared. And I remember going with Camille to get the X-ray, and I'm like, come out of the X-ray, and I saw a little glimpse of it, and I was like, it's not healed still. It didn't work. And I remember bawling in the car, like just bawling, like I'm never gonna pitch again. I'm never gonna pitch again. Like it's never gonna happen. And Camille was like, "You're gonna be fine. You don't know what the X-ray said. Like, just calm down." And you know, we went back to the house, and I got the phone call and said, "It's healing. Like it was stuck at like 75%. He's like, it's about 90% healed. He's like, it's healed a lot since then." And I remember bawling again. And then about a couple weeks later, he's like, Dr. Andrews wants to see you. And a couple weeks later, I was like getting kind of approved to throw and get back. And that's when I went back to that same hotel. And it was like the contrasts of I'm pitching again, I'm coming back, versus a few months earlier, I was like, I'm never going to pitch ever again. And it was just like a weird, wild, crazy, just roller coaster, honestly.
Yeah, and I can see the emotions as you retell the story and how you must have been feeling back then. Um, because you're on the upward trajectory of your career.
Yeah.
You've proven yourself. You're in a great organization. I mean, everybody, even
Yeah.
if they're not an Atlanta Braves fan, everybody knows um, this is a robust operation with a lot of talented people. And Snitker,
Yeah.
I think that was his first, or when you came in, I guess Freddie Gonzalez was his last season as manager. But
Yeah.
the team that eventually won the World Series is coming into place. I mean,
Hmm.
the new ballpark. Uh,
Yeah.
Now, so by August of 2017, is that right?
Yeah. That's right.
You're back, and another big moment against Seattle,
Yeah.
and you come in to face one batter. It's Robbie Cano,
Hmm.
another household name, and you get him to ground out. Um,
Yeah.
Again, how does it feel? Just you're back out there again. When you return after the first injury, and now here, or after Tommy John, and then here again,
Yeah.
is there that fear that this might happen again? Am I going to go through something like this again? Am I going to have another season-ending injury? Does that ever go away, or do you just kind of stay in the moment, stay in the day kind of mentality?
Yeah. I probably should have. I don't know. I, I, no, I didn't like, yeah, of course, like I thought I could tear my UCL, but like I felt my elbow felt as strong as it had ever been. And
Mhm.
I don't know, I just was confident. And I tell people that it's kind of like I had three debuts. 2015, 2016, the opening day was kind of one debut, and then 2017 coming back after I after I broke my elbow. Like those were I remember the feeling of 2017 and getting like I remember Snit saying like when he handed me the ball, he's like, "Welcome back. Here's Robbie." Like so. Yeah, I remember like just feeling so elated again, like I had just made another debut. Um, and yeah, it was special to after all of that emotion and roller coaster to finally be back. And like you said, I'm in this great organization. I got another chance to come back. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling healthy. Yeah, it was I forget about the 2016 a lot, the roller coaster, and just got to focus on the 2017. But you kind of forget what you went through to get there.
So 2017, you appear in 16 games. You pitched to a 2.51 ERA for the season. You got to be feeling pretty good when that year winds down. Um, I also I want to talk. I always like to talk on this show about relationships. Obviously, you got your teammates, um, that I have to imagine you're lifetime friends with some of these guys. But pitching coaches like Chuck Hernandez, Rick Kranitz,
Mm.
talk about some of those guys and the impact that they had on you.
Yeah, lots of names, lots of guys that had super impact. Chuck was big for me, especially like 2017, 2018. He was really helpful when I was coming back. And like I said, I made some mechanical changes, and Chuck was really big in helping me make those changes and kind of seeing where the stress was. And again, we didn't. They have technology for a lot of that now. I mean, this wasn't that long ago, but at the time, like there isn't really wasn't all the technology that the wearable tech and stuff. And so I leaned on a lot of those people when I was coming back, trying to make sure I could still be successful in the big leagues, but also healthy. So yeah, Marty and Chuck and even with my Cub days, Tommy and CY, Chris Young, like those guys are all. I still talk to Tommy and Chris Young and Rossi and all those people were. I always say, and for if kids are listening, everybody has something to say. Everybody, you might not like everything they say. You might only like a little bit of what they have to say, but somebody's got something that you can take and just build on it. Just mold it into who you want to be, who you think you should be. But don't discount anybody. Everybody has some wisdom to offer. And that was I don't know who told me, maybe my grandpa. He was a basketball coach forever. Maybe I heard it from him, but that was the best thing. Every coach, any mental skills, any front office, like I never discount anybody. Like what do you have for me? What do you think I could do better? So one of the best advice I've heard.
And ask questions of those old guys, those old gorillas.
Yep, absolutely. Good wisdom from those old guys.
So let's shoot forward a little bit. Man, I'd love to talk for a couple hours with you, but so so at the trade deadline in 2019, you get the news that you've been traded to this is an odd one to the San Francisco Giants. I got to ask
Mm,
you, this is going back to the some of the terms that people may not be familiar with, being DFA'd. When
yeah.
you got the information, I guess, from your agent that you'd been traded to the Giants, did you know that, I guess, a day later that they would designate you for assignment?
I found on Twitter that I got traded, first of all, so that was great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was a little surprised because 2018 I had a really good year, I felt like. And 2019 I had a really good year as well. I just had two bad games. And seeing in the future, like that was my kryptonite was those two or three blow up games.
Yeah.
The Cubs, that was three bad games, and it just, it happened so fast. And that's kind of the thing is like it can happen so fast and never discount where you are and rest on your laurels, especially when you're playing at the highest level. Um, you can never relax. But yeah, so just traded, got called the next day. Hey, we're gonna designate you for assignment. So essentially, that means I was on the 40-man. I wasn't on the 25-man roster, so I wasn't on the big league active roster. I was on what they would call the reserve list on the 40-man roster. And I was taken off that 40-man roster for they had to make a move. They just had an injury. Obviously, I was on the end. They just kind of wanted to dump money. And so, yeah, that I was designated. Nobody picked me up and was in their minor league system at that point because they still
Yeah.
owned my rights. So, yeah, I played for the Sacramento River Cats and we won a AAA championship that year. So it was awesome. I loved it. It was great for me.
Yeah. like I said, a former UCF Golden Knight, Vic Penn, he was telling me about some of the stops that he made and guys that he met in certain places he didn't expect that he'd be, teams that he was playing for. He said, "You're still making friends," um,
Mm.
and he said some of my best friends are from a place that I was playing for 6 months, or I was um, just on a few bus rides with the guy that we just completely connected. And um, was
Yeah,
that
that's a great point.
have been where you were with the Braves, and then now you're in Sacramento, and it's not the Ritz Carltons anymore. You're not
Mm.
flying on a private jet. The first few days, first week, first few road trips, is that tough, or are you just thinking this is where I am, and I'm just still blessed to be here,
Yeah,
to be playing?
obviously, yeah, you're just kind of blessed to have a jersey. Like mentally, it was good for me to go back. I just put so much pressure on myself when I was in the big leagues. I felt like I had to be, and maybe that was kind of that chip on my shoulder coming back to bite me at the end of my career. Um, yeah, I felt like I had to be almost perfect every time. I felt like I owe, um, another story that I'll quickly tell is 2018. I was pitching really well. Um, our closer went down, and I was our eighth inning, seventh, eighth inning guy, depending on the matchups. And I had my first save opportunity, and I blew it. I gave up 4 runs against the Orioles, and I remember I felt like I let the entire city of Atlanta down, and I don't know why. Like it's just how I felt. Like I had this pit in my stomach, and but yeah, so I put a lot of pressure on myself when I was in the big leagues, and then going to Sacramento was so good for me. And you're not staying on in the Ritz Carlton, and you're taking 5 a.m. flights and commercial flights, and you're playing in the Pacific Coast League, so the ball flies, and it's a lot of travel. But it was fun again. Like I had fun. I can't I can't say it a different way than it was just fun. And we
Love
were
that.
good, but we didn't expect to win it all, but we won it all. And I don't know, like you said, I played with some of those guys for 2 months, and I still talk to some of them because it was just fun again, and it was awesome. So yeah, it was exactly what I needed.
And then the end of 2019, I guess, near the winter meetings, December 2019, you get an offer from the Chicago Cubs.
Mhm.
This comes through your agent. Does he give you a call and say, "This is what's on the table here"?
Yeah, the Cubs were the first team to call. They're like, "We want to sign you." They were interested. The Mets were interested as well, and it was early in the off season. I didn't expect much of it. Um, and the Cubs are like, "Yeah, we want an interview." So I talked to Tommy, and I talked to Craig Breslow, who was there at the time, and they gave me a spiel on why they thought that they could help me out, and talked about spin rate, and I was like done. Like I want to sign. I was so again blessed to play for two amazing franchises. Like the hardest part about getting traded, and even the Giants was a great franchise, but the hardest part about getting traded was I loved Atlanta. I loved like you said, the organization was so cool. I got to play with like BMAC and French, Jeff Francoeur, and I got to meet Tom Glavine. I got to meet John Smoltz. I got to meet all those guys. Like Chipper Jones was all around. Like Henry Aaron, like Hank Aaron was around. Like it was so cool. And then to be recruited by the Cubs was like what? Like again, like I always had this like imposter syndrome when I was at the Cubs. Like I don't belong here because I'm playing with Tony Rizzo, like Baez, like KB, like those guys are World Series winners, and so it was like Jay Hay was every time I walk in, he goes, "What's up, Wink?" And it was like you're still talking to me, like it was, and it was just yeah, it was. it was awesome. It was, I was like, please sign me up at that point. I was trying not to show my cards, but yeah, I was like, I'm in.
Wow. And I want to just mention this because the Cubs have not reached the postseason since that 2020 COVID shortened
Mhm.
season, I guess if you could call it. But you pitched in one of the last games against the Marlins in Game One
Yeah.
of that wild card series. Uh, pitched the ninth inning, got a couple strikeouts, and um, how did you feel about just being a part of that organization at that time? How you could contribute, and it was an odd season, I guess, for everybody involved. But um,
Yeah, it was an odd season, but like you're talking the postseason, it's still the postseason, and it's still the
yeah,
playing for the Chicago Cubs at Wrigley Field. Um, Man, it was wild. I tell people like like the playoffs just have that buzz. Like I wasn't on the playoff team in 2018, but I was around. And then 2019 I was on that team, but I was with the Giants at the time. But like there's this buzz about the postseason. And even though there was no fans in the stands, you could just feel like this is the postseason. I don't know how to explain it. Um, Other than like just the buzz about it. Like it was this is the playoffs. And so to be able to pitch in a playoff, is a blessing in itself. Whether it was COVID or not, I don't care. Like it was so cool. It was awesome. I wish I could have done it more, especially with the Cubs. But yeah, it was a special team. Kind of sad that COVID happened because I really think that team probably could have made a run. Um, we it was a special bunch.
absolutely. This is just a Dan time footnote, but I couldn't believe it. I'm reading the box score for Game One against the Marlins. Dan, a couple of the umpiring crew, the second base umpire Dan Iasonia, and the left field umpire Dan Bellino. So you got a couple Dans on the officiating crew that night. Um, I'm sure that wasn't
Love
lost on you, of course.
it. Yeah. I
um,
was trying to. There's probably some Dan's on the other team as well. Dan's all over the place.
um, what is it like when you think about your time in Chicago, Wrigley Field? How about just the first time when the fans are back, 2021, and you're out there? Any great memories, games that really stick out to you where it was just a thrill and
Yeah,
you're hearing "Go Cubs, Go" across the PA.
the best. Again, like I can't reiterate it enough. Like um, that is the best. I gotta close out a bunch of games. Obviously, not a save opportunity. We had Craig Kimbrell, the best, a Hall of Famer, and he had one of the best years he's ever had. But I got to close out a bunch of games, and it's the best going through the line here in the Cubs go. And you know, 21, we started out with like a third, 20%, and then it kind of grew. And I got a pitch opening day at 21, which was awesome. It's freezing cold, but there's fans back in the stands. Like it's special. And then I remember in June, we were playing the Padres, and that was like full capacity. And I got a pitch in that game, and I think that's the hardest I ever throw. I was like 96.4 or something. So yeah, I was juiced up. But one game really sticks out was when we were playing the Mets, and this is the first year we had the ghost runner rule, which you start with a runner on second in the extra innings. And so I'm coming in pitching the 10th inning and just nervous. Don't know why, just nervous as can be, facing, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, Dominic Smith, like the heart of their lineup. And I struck out the first guy and then walked two guys. So I had bases loaded and one out. and then I got Dominic Smith to ground out in the double play, and I just remember the place just erupted, and it was like usually when the place erupt, I'm on the visiting side, and I just gave up a big homer. But this was a great erupted, and then we ended up. Jay Hay walked it off the first, like it was like the fourth pitch of the next inning. We walked it off, and that was my first Cub win. And so that will always be special for me. That game will for sure.
And Dan, I jotted this down. In the 2020 season, 9 games at Wrigley Field, you pitched to a 1.64 ERA. You must have been feeling pretty good about your stuff that season. And another thing that I want to point out, this is kids, unfortunately, will never see this again. Maybe it's a good thing without the pitchers hitting anymore. But across your career, Dan, you got three times up to the plate. I just got to ask you real quick, as you know, starting pitchers used to get 1 or 2, maybe 3 at bats. Very unusual for a relief pitcher, but not completely unlikely, depending on the game situation. But as a reliever, like I think there's a game where you're pitching 2 innings against the Padres, and you're just going to stay in the game and grab a bat.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? You can't possibly be going into that day thinking I'm going to put on a helmet and grab a bat and stand in that batter's box in a few hours.
You never think that. You never, like it never goes through. You're trying to get the best in the world out. Like that's the last thing. I remember my first time. I was so excited because we were winning by a lot, and I was really excited. It's just cool. Like my first time, I remember you see it from the pitcher's mound. You see the field from the pitch, but now you get to stand in the batter's box and see what the hitter sees, and just seeing the field from you're like, whoa, this is so much cooler. Like just little reliever stuff like that we always talk about. But yeah, I never struck out in a major league game, so in my 3 ABs, I didn't strike out, so 2 ground outs. But I remember the Cubs one. Gosh dang, I can't believe I'm blanking. I can see his face. Our bench coach at the time, he's like, "Hey, you're hitting." I'm like, "No, I'm not." And he goes, "Yeah, you're up first. You're leading off." And I'm like, "What?" I didn't have anything. He's like, "Here's everything." And he's like, "Swing at the." He's like, he's 95% sliders. He's like, "Expect a slider." I was like, "Okay." So I'm like trying to get out of there as fast as possible because it's hot. It's June, First pitch I see is a stinker. And I like, there's a slider. No, it's not. And it's right off my knuckles, like right back. I think it was 60 mile an hour. But I'm like, get me out of here. And then he bobbled it a couple times. And I'm like, no, just pick it up and throw it and get me out, like.
Get this over with.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be on the bases. Please.
Was this, I wrote it down, Austin Adams for the Padres?
It was, yeah. It sure was.
Grounded back to the pitcher.
Yep.
Who's in these situations? Whose bat are you grabbing? Whose helmet are you putting on?
I think it was Arrieta's. I think maybe they probably got me the smallest bat and made sure, they're like it used to be American League teams when they'd play National League teams, if a reliever had to hit, they'd hand them a broken bat and say, "You're not swinging." But thankfully Rossi was like, "Yeah, we want to see what you got." So they let me swing.
Do you glance over and Rizzo and KB, are they hang it over the rail? I mean,
They
they're
love
eating
it.
this up.
They love it. Yeah. I heard it so much, especially from Tony. He's like, you're never hitting again. You know that, right? I'm like, good. Don't bring the DH, please.
Right. So a great time in Chicago. Those fans, I mean, I just can't imagine. I see it on TV from the pitchers, from the center field camera angle. You see the fans on their feet, and then the excitement when you get that final out of the inning.
Yeah.
Who are some of the guys that you on that Cubs team that you really clicked with, that maybe you still talk to today?
Yeah, our bullpen was really close. Actually we set a few records that year in 21. But Craig lives here in Nashville. He lives in not too far outside of Nashville, so um, he's we see him every now and then. Rex Brothers is another guy who lives in Nashville. So we had three Nashville country boys in the bullpen that year. So I still see those guys all the time. But like um, Keegan Thompson and Justin Steele, they were in the bullpen a lot. So talk to them every now and then. But it was such a close. Like I said, I talked to Chris Young, the bullpen coach. Chad Noble is our catching, our bullpen catcher. So like that knit right there, like we stick together. So it's like a family within a family. We'd sit on the back of the plane, all eight of us, just, not hanging out with all the rich people, we're down just being normal guys. But yeah, the bullpen guys are super close. I still close with a lot of those. Like Javi was great, and Rizzo didn't know a stranger. I think he's still that way, and Arietta would always take us golfing. So yeah, it was like I said, the 2020 and 2021 teams, those were special teams, especially early in the year. Like before we traded everyone in 21, we were close knit, and we were in first going into June. June like
Yeah.
15th or something, and then we lost 11 in a row, and just the wheels fell off. And but yeah, it was those were I played with so many special teams. 2018, 2019 Braves, like 18 we weren't supposed to win anything, and we started the NL East, and they've won ever since then. So I was very blessed to play with some of the teams that I did.
Well, Dan, we're probably running short on time here. I just want to wrap up some of the baseball talk.
Yeah.
You signed a deal with the Texas Rangers around the spring of 2022. Opted out of that deal by June of 2022, and then signed with a minor league deal with the White Sox. And Dan, you're at a place in your life now where you said two kids.
Three kids now.
Three kids. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a zoo here.
Yeah, the gray hairs, they have a way of multiplying when you start adding an extra child to the house. I don't know.
So fast. They came on so fast. Yeah, it was like I had a kid and gray hair. I was like, where did these come from? So yeah, it's definitely.
But so you elected free agency November 10th, 2022. At this point, are you wanting to turn a corner in your life with your family? How are those decisions made where, I mean, you got to feel like I could still play. I maybe would still like to if the situation was right, but how, and certainly if you're uncomfortable answering that question, that's fine. But because guys hit those crossroads a lot. Everybody imagines that Major League Baseball players, play an average of 10 or 12 seasons, and it's not really typical. I mean, to even play one or two seasons professionally, you're in an elite group there. But
yeah, it was honestly, I was kind of wearing me down a little bit. It's a hard job. It's hard. 21 ended really bad for me. I was pitching well. I had a lot more walks than I wanted to, but like I was limiting the hard contact, and I felt like I was pitching. I was doing well. I felt like I could have done better. I was going back, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and we traded everyone away, and I was left there, kind of like, the Will Smith meme of him just like, I felt like that, like nobody else was around me. Um, and I gave up 12 runs and only got 2 outs in a span of a week, and I got DFA'd, as we talked about earlier, and nobody picked me up, and didn't expect anybody to. And then we had the lockout that off season, and so I didn't sign till late March with the Rangers, and um, Rangers, I pitched well and had an opportunity to get called up, and contractually, just we had, since I was a veteran player, I had to waive some of my rights, and I just wasn't going to do that. And which I don't blame them for, doing that at all. And then I opted out, and then they had a few guys have COVID, and and then I went to the White Sox, and I was about to get called up, and I blew out my back, and it was just like a spiral of, and at this time, like I said, it was wearing on me. I had family. My wife was pregnant with our third when I was playing in Charlotte, and she had just gotten a job as a nurse practitioner, so she wasn't traveling with me. And I was like, I don't want to give it up because I love it, but it's just wearing me down. Like, would I be better off doing something else? And then I tried to play last year in 23, and I was throwing 95 still. Went out to tread in Charlotte and was working out with them, and I felt like I still had all the stuff. I just couldn't get any interest. And they slashed some of the minor league jobs, which hurt some veterans like me. I wasn't getting a big league deal, which I knew I wouldn't towards the end of my career. But I felt like I still had a lot to offer. I felt like I pitched really well in 22. It just didn't work out for me to pitch in the big leagues. And then I wasn't going to play indie ball. I just was not going to go do that. And it's nothing against indie ball. I had 3 kids. I played 6 years in the big leagues. I had 12 years of professional experience. I just didn't have the heart for it. And I think if you're going to play indie ball, you got to have some of that heart and love for the baseball. And I couldn't be away from my family for that. And and I was just it didn't hit me all at once that I was done. And then, summer of last year, I was like, I think I'm done. And then I got a job offer to work for ADP and sell 401k, and which is awesome. I get to meet some cool people. I don't really love the cold calling. That stinks. That's the
I'm
worst
with
part
you on
about it.
that.
Yeah, so it stinks. It's the worst part. I didn't think I'd have to do it, especially going from everybody wanting to talk to me. Now nobody wants to talk to me, It's like, come on. But yeah, I get to work from home. I get to see my kids, get to tuck them in every night. Uh, so
And Dan,
it's hard. Yeah.
and how old is your oldest son now?
He's 6, so he just started kindergarten.
Okay, I think our oldest boys are the same age, and
Okay, nice.
um, I don't have to tell you this, but they love having dad around. They love having you at home at night, tucking them in at night, and you can't put a price on that.
Nope,
Um, there's
absolutely.
people, mothers, fathers, there's things that are just clawing at you for, your ambition wants to shoot in all these different directions. You've got your talents, your interests, and all these things, and you just you're just chomping at the bit sometimes that you want to be doing something other than watching Blaze and the Monster Machines, or uh whatever that they tie you up for a couple hours doing this stuff. This But it dawns on you that you don't get these moments back, and uh the time that you're spending with them, just sitting with them or being at a park somewhere with them. you know you, you could either be in that photograph or be somewhere else. And No
Yeah.
offense to the guys that do have kids and they have jobs and careers that take them around the country, around the world, and then they're back home. Nothing against that, but children love having those um, parental figures around. Um,
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
drives
I
us
agree with that.
crazy sometimes, but
Yeah, I always say being a dad's the best job, but also the hardest job in the world. But yeah, it kills you. It gutted me a lot. And my last year was like, my kids, Dad, when are you coming home? Like, why are you still playing baseball? Like, what do you like? Why aren't you here? Um, and now, of course, they're like, why don't you go back to baseball? We loved baseball. Well, no kidding, because you got to eat ice cream and play in the jungle gym all the time. And so,
right.
yeah, it's
Well,
the
one
hit or
other thing
miss.
I want to say for people listening that follow baseball, um, a relief pitcher, like you said, if you have 16 sparkling outings in a row or close to it, and then you have like 3 or 4 horrendous outings up against those, your ERA all of a sudden balloons way out of proportion, and it's not
Mhm.
really reflective of your entire season. And you know, a starting pitcher, well, depending on your, you probably can't get away with too many bad starts either. But um, just because of the innings that you're being called on to handle versus 5 or 6 of the clip, sometimes is not as reflective of the season as a whole. So
Yeah, well said.
yeah,
Yeah, it's hard to paint the picture of a lot of people's years that way. But yeah, and the value of relief pitchers. I think we're the best position. Obviously, the who wins the World Series, who has the best bullpens. That's my take
absolutely.
on it.
What's your stance? This is another kind of baseball question, but the opener. Some teams will employ
Mhm.
an opener for that first, second inning, and then turn it over to the starter to try to get you to the seventh or eighth. Would you have been down?
Uh, yeah, I would have been down because uh, I was a start, coming up, I was a starter. I loved like the best part about starters, you had your routine. You knew when you were pitching. The worst part about relieving is sitting down in that bullpen. You'll be like, oh gosh, like when am I gonna pitch? It's the second inning. Can I pitch this inning? So yeah, that would have been great. And plus, once you got your 1, 2, 3 scoreless inning, you get to sit in the clubhouse and hang out the rest of the game. So being an opener would have been great, but I'm unsure how I feel about it. I think you don't want to mess with the starter routine. For some, you got to know the starter. You got to know the pitcher. Some guys like John Lester never would have been. He had his routine, meticulous about it, and that's why he was as good as he was. Like you wouldn't want to mess with him. And obviously, he was a veteran. He's not a guy you do that with. Um, it's an interesting concept, but it's definitely a pick and choose who you do it with, I think.
Well, Dan, a few questions here. This is just some. Let's kind of see what's on. The question used to be, "What's on your iPod?" I guess everyone's got their own streaming service now, but it could be Spotify or whatever. But any music you're listening to, or other podcasts or stuff that you're kind of into when you put on the earbuds, the AirPods.
I was just listening to your one of your latest guests, the New Zealand
Oh
Dan
man,
Sharp.
yes.
Man, he's so good. I was really impressed. I was listening to a couple of the podcasts, and when his music came on, I was like, wow. Being in Nashville and playing music, playing the guitar myself, like I love like the singer songwriter, like the soul kind of music. But I listen to everything honestly, except rap. I'm When I was younger, I loved that stuff, but now I'm like, it's not for me. It's not whatever.
Yeah.
But we're always listening to country, Christian, podcasts. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm big in fantasy football. I love fantasy football. I actually got my fantasy football trophy right behind me as well. So a
Nice.
lot of my podcasts are fantasy football related or market related, and trying to keep up with uh, selling more 401ks.
And how about favorite ball players that you had as a kid? And maybe I know you met a good many of them, but you're 7, 8, 9 years old, 10 years old. Who was your guy?
Mark McGuire. I mean, that was
Yeah.
uh, we. I remember staying up and watching 62 home run when he broke the record. I remember watching against the Cubs too. I remember watching that. And then we were at 69 and 70 that year too. We went to the game. We were in like the fourth deck, way up there. But I told my
The big,
dad we
big Mac
couldn't.
zone.
We were behind home plate, so we were above Big Mac zone. But I loved it. Like I said, I was a basketball, but I was a baseball nut too. Um, my dad wanted to leave early in that game, and I was like, no, like we are not leaving. Like, what if we miss it? And he came up like an inning or two later, and he hit 70. And I was like, see, Dad, that's why we don't leave.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, Mark McGuire was. I never got to meet him. I guess his son's in the game now. So
Yep.
I saw him in a Cubs uniform the other day. I was like, seems so wrong.
Those were, hey, those are some exciting times in baseball. Uh, at, at that time, I mean, it was a blast. It was
Yeah.
great TV. It was if you're at the games. Um, a lot of controversy around that time period, but I think with the passage of time, if you were there for it and you were a younger person, I mean, I close my eyes and think back and I mean, Sammy Sosa, I had a
Mm,
blast watching him play. I got
yeah.
I got to see him at Wrigley Field in the mid '90s, and one time I was sitting there with my brother Travis at a game. This was probably like '96, and
Mm,
I said he's going to hit a home run on this next pitch, and it happened. So
nice.
nobody recorded that conversation, but I was pretty proud of it. But Sammy could have hit a home run on any given at bat. So
Yeah. Those guys were like they revived baseball. They really did that, and you cannot knock them for what they did. Everybody was doing it, but baseball wouldn't be what it is without that era, and it was a great era. Um, yeah, I don't fault those guys at all.
yeah, one of my favorite World Series, I used to watch the DVD over and over, was the 2001 Diamondbacks Yankees World Series that
Mm,
goes 7 games. I was a big Cubs fan. Obviously, Mark Grace is on the D-backs that year, and the way he leads off the ninth with just this impossible base hit against Mariano Rivera, I watched that over and over and over again. And yeah, that's
yeah,
just
yeah. That's I love that. I distinctly remember the Luis Gonzalez hit as well. Like remember
yeah.
watching that game. And then I don't know if you've read Mariano's book, Closer, and he talks about 99. And you know, he talks about the best thing that ever happened to him was he was able to turn the page on like if he blew he because he never blew more than three or more than two saves in a row. And for him, it was just that new midnight hit. He washed it away, and he talks about in the World Series, like going through all that, and it, it's so cool to hear it from his perspective and the take that he has. I won't ruin the book, but it's awesome.
Oh, I got to read it now.
Yeah,
I, I
it's such
I
a
was
good book.
I was not a Yankee fan in my younger years. It's like they were absolutely the enemy, and now I've got
Yeah,
a softer perspective a little bit.
I feel the
But
same
I
way.
love, yeah. I mean, I watched the Jeter documentary. Those guys are legends of the game. So,
Yeah.
how about do you have a baseball movie? Do you get into the sports movies? And if so, is there a favorite?
Ooh, not. I mean, all of the baseball movies are great. I think just Sandlot is like timeless. I mean, I can watch it. You can watch it wherever. You can watch it with your kids. My kids watch Sandlot. They love it. Um, I also like what's the perfect game? What's a Billy Chapel? What's he? I forget. Is it
Oh,
Perfect Game or what is
I think, yeah,
the
that
Perfect
that
Game?
sounds familiar.
I like that
I
movie
haven't
too.
seen that
It's
one.
interesting. It's a good take, but I don't. Again, the three kids. I don't have time to watch movies. Only movies we watched was that I remember watching on a bus when I was on the minor leagues. Talk about what we would do. That's what we would do. We'd watch baseball movies on the bus in 7 hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we do.
Okay, I do see the Molina jersey behind you. I've seen it the whole episode. Yadi Molina
Yeah,
was another guy. So being a Cub fan, Cardinals are the enemy, and they still are to me, but to be
yeah,
respectful about it. And I remember I watched Yadi's final at bat. Um, and I gotta say it was hard not to root for him to get a hit. I think that was in
yeah.
the postseason.
Mhm.
I've drawn a blank on who he was up against, but what a career! I mean, for a catcher, um,
Yeah, yeah. I face Shoddy so much. I don't even. Maybe he might have been one of the higher faced players that I faced personally. But growing up a Cardinal fan, like Yachty was like when he first came up, like I was in high school, like so I was a big Cardinal fan. And then for me, it's kind of like when I finally faced him and pitched against him, it was like I made it. Like there are some guys along the way that you're like, I've finally made it. Like you strike those guys out or you pitch against them. So I'm pretty proud of that one just because I got Acuna above there too. I got a bunch of Cubs signed jerseys as well. So um, I those are just cool. I hope someday my kids think they're cool too. And then I got my debut jersey behind me as well. So yeah,
oh man, well Dan, I'm trying to cover everything here. I guess now being a retirement plan specialist, this is something that I wish at 22 years old I had paid more attention to, or even 28 years old. Um,
mm,
you must have known a lot of guys in the minors, in the major leagues, even that the money's coming in and the money's just going out. But
mm.
um, what would you say? Um, what would you say to young athletes, to young people listening that maybe have a pretty lucrative career? They've gone to school and they've landed a great job. They're a couple years in, but they're buying everything that they impulsively want to uh, buy, and they're not really planning for that day where that money stream stops. It's
Yeah, yeah. The best thing that I did was hire a financial advisor. Yeah, I remember my first year, Mike Miner was like, "Hey, you need to talk to somebody." I was like, I barely made any money. I'm like, why would I? He's like, no, you need somebody to help you go through this. So I interviewed a few financial advisors and hired the guy that I'm still with today. And that was the best decision I made. Um, because not only does he save and help, but he's like a financial planner. So he kind of lays things out like this is what it's going to look like down the road. This is what you need to save if you want to have this lifestyle. Um, so yeah, that was and talking on the 401k side. I remember specifically that year too, filling out the 401k, and I had hired my financial advisor before that. I was like, "How much should I put?" He goes, max it out, like just. And I was like, well, what if I'm in the minor leagues? I don't want to give that. He's like, max it out. He's like, they're gonna match essentially. So those whatever years I was in the big leagues, they maxed out the highest contributions. So they essentially gave you a raise. They gave you an extra. At the time, it was $40,000 a year, and that was put in my 401k. And so I left the game with a very, you know, good sized 401k. Um, and I wouldn't have had that without my financial advisor. I know a lot of guys are like, I'm not giving this money. I might need this money. You come from the minor leagues where you have nothing. You're like, everything you hold close. Um, but those guys missed out on the contributions. So that was the best thing for me, was hiring a financial advisor, because I didn't know what I was doing. Like, it's complicated. Now that I'm kind of in it, it's not as complicated as but there are some really smart and educated people that can help others. And I know financial advisors that'll take anybody. So I think that again, I'm not a financial advisor, and I would never be a financial advisor. I work closely with financial advisors, but I think there. It's such a good. It's the best thing that I did, for sure.
Love it. It's like you said, financial decisions at a young age, if you're not talking to the right people, it can be kind of confusing. The material, if you're trying to just pour over pages of stuff you don't really understand these
Mhm.
allocations, and so you just kind of put it aside and go on about your life for a few years, and you don't take any action. Um,
Yep.
and you got money coming in, but you're not investing and letting that interest compound and
Yep.
getting the max uh, match from your employer. Um, but
Yeah. You're exactly right.
and real quick, Dan, I know that you're coming up here on 10 years. I think if I have this correct, Easter Sunday, was it Easter Sunday 2014 that you really began taking that walk in your faith kind of full on and realize, hey, I'm in. I've got somebody on my side, and I don't want to put the words in your mouth here. So it dawned on me. I was like, because I listened to this podcast from 2018. I'm like, well, we're right up on 10 years.
Well, that must be a God thing right there, because I didn't know that either. So thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I grew up Catholic. I went to school, or I went to church every Sunday. We didn't miss a church. Um, we actually, at Catholic school, we'd go during the week too. So there was a lot of weeks I went twice a week to church. And then, like every kid, I went off to college, and I was still would call myself a Christian, and went to baseball, and that's kind of where I was pursued the most. Like, I felt Jesus pursuing me, and friends. Why did he line me up with these friends that I had so much in common with, and they're also like these crazy, who I would have called, being the Catholic boy, were like Jesus freaks, like, for lack of
Right.
a better term. Um, and it just was like they kept pursuing me and saying, "Hey, let's go to chapel." And I was like, "Well, that's not really church, is it?" Like, they're like, "No, it's chapel." And I was like, "Well, how does that work?" And so, like, I kind of learned the non-denominational, other denominations of side. And then, yeah, we went to church on Easter. Somehow we had Easter off in the middle of the year, which was on a Sunday, which is never base. That's not like baseball at all. Yeah, and then I just remember being there and just being like, he was like, that was when I was like surrendered, like, my life is yours. And I still struggle, like, give it, especially like in this transition period, like giving like, no, this is mine, like, giving that up to him. But I wouldn't, he knew that I needed him at that time. Again, like 2014, that's when I blew out my elbow. That's when I had Tommy John. And again, I talked about the peace. Like, I know that's where that peace comes from. I was like, I knew God's got me. Like, so yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. I don't talk about it on the podcast, and I didn't grow up in a religious household. It was something that, as my family has been, as we're complete now, everybody says, "Are you going to have a fourth kid?" No, we're not. We're done. I can promise you that.
Heard that. Yeah.
I mean, I would some in a perfect world, I would have four or five or six children, if I
Yeah.
could, I don't know, clone myself. But uh, but I've always been a little uncomfortable talking about my faith, and I don't talk about it on the episodes that
Yeah.
often. But that's probably just a product of my upbringing. But we found a place that we like to attend, and we've been going for the past year. And I was baptized in I'm forgetting now, October last year.
Nice.
And it's
Congratulations.
just, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I just tell people, for me, it works. And
Yeah.
it's something that I feel like, if you open that door, you're not really going to understand, what you and I are talking about until you have that
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. We had lots of bullpen conversations about things, and I was thick-headed and thinking that I could beat it into some people, people that I really care about, and I still do, and I pray for them often. And I'm just, I'm at the point where I'm like, can I know God's got them. I don't know. I cannot explain it, and I understand. Like I try to lead by example and not with words. Words don't work. You're not going to beat somebody ahead, with words.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny you hear a lot of people who have had this surrender, and even my example 10 years ago, I remember where I was. I remember the feeling, but I don't remember the words of the sermon. I don't remember any of it. And I couldn't even tell you the pastor's name, but I remember where I was and what I realized at the time. And so I definitely can relate to how you feel about it's going to be all right no matter what.
That's right. Okay, well, Dan, this has been fantastic. One more question I was going to ask, and this is just kind of for my brother here.
Yeah.
All right, so the cutter, was that? I mean, how many times out of 10 is that going to be your go-to pitch when you've got, it's a pitcher's count, it's 0 and 2 or 1 and 2? What are you throwing? I'm up to bat. Let's just imagine that I'm, you know, middle of the order hitter. I can, um, I'm a good gap hitter. We got uh, runners on the corners, one out. You think you can maybe induce a double play here, or strike me out? What are you throwing me? It's one ball, two strikes, and you've got a one-run lead. So if I hit one in the gap, that runner from first is scoring, and now you've given up the lead. What are you going to against a guy like me that I'm imagining I can play at that level?
Yeah. Yeah. With everything nowadays, it's more of what's the scouting report say? Are you left-handed or right-handed? Um,
Yep.
because that would matter. How did I set you up? So let's say I went,
Let's say I've fouled off three straight pitches,
okay.
so it's still 1 and 2.
Yeah. Again, this is the beauty of baseball. Like you kind of read when you're in the situation. You're reading swings. You're reading how are you fouling it off. If you're late or if you're early, um, it, did I throw inside? Did I move some of your feet? How uncomfortable are you? It's a dance. It really is. And maybe that'll help you watch. Like if you watch baseball, you can see the good pitchers. It's really like they're like Kyle Hendricks is a master at this. He reads hitters and their scouting report so well. But yeah, 1-2. I'm probably trying to get you to chase a cutter off. If you're right-handed or even a left-handed, I'm trying to get you to swing underneath that. Left-handed, I'd probably get you a cutter up and in and see if I could get you to weakly ground ball and a double play. Because I'm trying to stay away from damage. I have some pitches to play with. So yeah, cutter on right-handed, I'm probably trying to get you to chase a cutter off the plate. And then if you're getting to it, you're not getting any damage with it. And then it depends on how far you are a right-hander and you kind of get out there a little bit. That's when I'd come back either with that cutter inside, trying to get you to move some feet, that four seam inside, depending on the scouting report. Four seam inside may not be a great thing to throw to certain hitters. But yeah, that's kind of, again, like I said, it's such a and that's the fun when you're locked in and you're in the moment. You're not worried about what actually happens. Man, there's no better place to be than that in that position, and just me versus you competition.
Like I said at the top of the episode, always trying to speak to that one guy that's listening. You're still driving. Man, you've been driving for a while and you're still listening to this podcast. Thank you, my friend. What I lost my train of thought. This never happens. What was I going to say? Um, I had something I was going to say there, and it just slipped into the void.
That happens.
Oh, I was going to
Happens to
tie
me
it all
all the time.
together. Yeah. Dan, just an incredible episode here. Um, I can't thank you enough for your time. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yeah. So I have to trim some of this on the audio version.
Good.
Folks, go onto YouTube, look up some Dan Winkler. You may have to search Daniel Winkler, Danny Winkler, um, but Dan Winkler probably most common, and relive some of these highlights. There's some great stuff at Wrigley Field that I watched with the Cubs, and relive some of these memories. This has been a blast. Thank you for your time tonight, Dan. Anything else that you want to? I feel like we've covered almost everything, but that you'd like to plug.
No, I mean, I appreciate your time. This has been fun. It's always, hope it didn't run too long. I can talk about myself probably too much, relive the glory days. But no, I appreciate you having me on, and just being interested in baseball. So yeah, it's cool.
Absolutely. Um, Dan's story is a story of resilience and preparation and believing in himself against all odds. It helps to have some people in your corner, and I love the story, Dan. So if you're going through something right now and you're in this place, we've given you plenty of material here to draw on how you can um, get through those dark times, because we've all had them, and we don't like to talk about it, but we're probably going to have things happen again, that we're going to need to draw on um, uh, our resources to get through it.
Mm.
Everybody, be good to yourself. This is something that Dan Zlotnick, love his music. DZB 2023, one plug there. It's a great album to listen to. Be good to yourself. It's hard to do, but do it. And thank you so much, Dan. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Would love to have you back again, if you're so willing to carve out another couple hours.
Love to be back. This is fun. I appreciate it.
All right. That's it for this episode of the Dan Time Podcast. We'll see you guys next week. Have a wonderful week. Take care of yourself. All right, buddy. Well, that's let me stop the recording here.